I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, upheaval in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. As today, December 2nd, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in essence, dissolved the governing coalition which he's led since 2013 by firing two key partners in his government, Finance Minister Yair Lapid and Justice Minister Tzipi Livni. Let me remind you that Israel has a parliamentary system. There are 120 Knesset members. A governing coalition must have at least a majority of those 120 members, which means that a government needs a coalition of 61 or more seats to lead an Israeli government. By firing Lapid of the Yesh Atid party and Livni of the Hatnuah party, Netanyahu lost 19 Yesh Atid members and 6 Hatnuah members, so his coalition falls well below the necessary majority of 61 seats. And so, Israel is headed to early elections, probably in March. What finally caused the rift between Netanyahu and Lapid and Livni? What are the probable political consequences to an early election? Which party is now likely to win the most seats? And who is most likely to be in a position to create the next coalition government? For some answers, we're pleased to be joined from Tel Aviv by Yaakov Eilon, news anchor of I-24 News. Eilon, thank you so much for joining us, Yaakov. I appreciate it.
Hi, Mark. My pleasure.
Good. So, Yaakov, what happened? Basically, from your perspective, what really happened here? Why did Netanyahu fire Lapid and Livni?
Well, you know what? Nobody really knows. I mean, in the eyes of many Israelis, it's just a snowball of egos and miscalculations that just went out of control. And we're talking like 20 months after the last elections. Prime Minister Netanyahu suspected that his coalition partners are actually his rivals and that they are out to replace him. So he just reacted by going to election, dissolving this government. We're talking mainly about Yair Lapid, the head of Yesh Atid party. This party is the second largest. And Lapid has criticized Netanyahu on issues like lack of progress in the peace process with the Palestinians and deterioration of U.S.-Israeli relations. But all his partners criticized Netanyahu. He just saw Lapid as a political threat, so he reacted.
Mm-hmm. You know, Yaakov, there was a committee bill that we read about here in America that passed the committee, a Knesset in the committee, and that seems to seek to declare Israel a Jewish state and to create a greater sense of distinction between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. That bill now has to go to the Knesset floor. To what extent do you believe the bill was a cause for the collapse of the coalition government?
No, it wasn't the cause. It was really the end, the end thing that put actually the whole thing into one big collapse. Lapid's party, Yesh Atid, was actually on the verge of implementing a few major reforms that really relate to Israeli life. I'm talking about cost of housing and cost of living and education and healthcare. And Netanyahu did not want to give him these achievements. So just short of getting these reforms made, he stopped everything. And now everything is stuck, which is more than anything really bad news for Israeli public, who are going to get stuck with a campaign that nobody wants and sort of a limbo of 6 months until we have a new government. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Nobody's sure that it's going to be any better than the current one.
Yes. It's so interesting, Yaakov. You mentioned housing, education, and healthcare. What you're suggesting is that for political reasons, purely political reasons, Netanyahu opposed Lapid in these areas, not because he was against them substantively, but he did not want to give Lapid a political victory. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that this is part of the political game, and if you follow Israeli public opinion polls, you'll see that most Israelis look at their politicians as playing the political game instead of putting their hands together, to benefit them all. Mm-hmm. That's the general feeling. Most Israelis think that these elections are really not necessary, after 6 months of a very, very excruciating campaign, we'll probably end up not far away from where we are today.
We read that during the Gaza conflict, Operation Protective Edge, the Israeli people experienced a kind of unity that was almost unique in recent Israeli history, and that people were very pleased with Netanyahu's handling of what was obviously a war in Gaza. Number one, do you feel that that was the truth, that people were pleased with him? And in general, Yaakov, what's your sense of how people, the average Israeli, feels about the work that Netanyahu has done as prime minister?
Well, first of all, I'm quoting public opinion polls, and it's true that during the war and short time after this, Netanyahu got very high approval rates from the Israeli public, but in Israel, memory is really a short-term memory.
Uh-huh.
And short time after that, Netanyahu numbers slided and went down again because the major factors in Israeli life are still very, very of concern to people here. And I'm talking again about the cost of living, cost of housing, and healthcare and other issues here. And this was actually the gist and the heart of the last campaign 20 months ago. And this is going to be again in the heart of the next campaign. Plus, I would add the issue of Netanyahu himself and the question of whether he was the blame in this elections, or is it somebody else's blame?
We saw, by the way, a poll conducted by Channel 2, which seemed to indicate the public believes that Netanyahu is most responsible for the collapse of the government. Lapid is second. But it looks to me like at the moment the Israeli public is holding Netanyahu responsible for what is obviously a collapse of the government. It's supposed to be determined on Monday, but I assume that's just a formality, Yaakov, that basically we're heading towards new elections in March or sometime. Do you feel the Channel 2 poll is correct when it says that the people who blame anybody blame Netanyahu more than anyone else for the collapse of the government?
Well, I can't dispute the public opinion polls that were done by professionals here and were published by a well-known Israeli television channel. But if you ask me, do I believe it? Yeah, of course. I think that's the general feeling here. But this was just the beginning. Netanyahu just kicked off this campaign a couple hours ago when he announced on national television that he fired Lapid and Livni. This is just the beginning of a long and very, it's going to be very, very tough campaign. And we'll see a lot of public opinion polls, and Israelis do change their minds occasionally, so it's not over till it's over.
Okay. I want to try to frame this question, which I believe is ultimately the most important one I can ask you. What did Netanyahu have to gain by firing Lapid and Livni? No one seems to think he's going to get more seats in a new election. He's going to lose seats. He's going to be back in the same situation where he's going to have to make a coalition government with someone. What we hear is Lapid is also, basically Lapid has committed political suicide, if I read the polls correctly, that Lapid will never get as many votes in the next election as he had won seats in this most recent election that made him a coalition partner.
Right.
So Lapid is going to lose. Tzipi Livni is going to lose. Netanyahu is going to lose. Maybe Bennett's party, the Jewish Home Party, will in fact gain more seats. But I can't, for the life of me, Yaakov, understand what drove Netanyahu to think this was in his political interest.
Well, Mark, you're absolutely right. This is the million-dollar question. Why did they do it? And it doesn't make any sense to any Israeli because they are all going to lose. And that brings me back to my first thing. Most Israelis think that these guys are just egomaniacs, excuse my expression, and they just miscalculated the whole thing and just couldn't back off. And here we are in the middle of an election campaign that nobody wanted.
Yes. You know, it is very reminiscent of how Americans feel about American politicians. This may be a universal problem worldwide, Yaakov, that basically it's hard to get statesmen now today. And you have, as you've described, much more political animals who sometimes permit ego to drive them. I remain skeptical that Netanyahu could be, I don't know, for lack of a better word, so naive. I don't believe he's naive, Yaakov. I believe in his mind, he understands the political landscape, and something makes him think this will be to his benefit. Do you have any idea what he might think is a good reason for him to do this?
Well, there were reports that he was trying to form a new coalition with the Orthodox parties, who are sort of up for grabs here in this system. The system is more or less 50-50 between right and left, and the religious parties always, can join either party. But it didn't work. It didn't work for him. And, you can ask any political analyst in Israel the same question you ask, what does Netanyahu have in mind? And nobody can come up with any really coherent answer to that.
Okay.
Unless there's something really, really good that only Netanyahu knows and nobody else does.
Okay. One more thing I'd like to get your take on. There's such a different perception of what drives Israeli life if you talk to American Jews, as opposed to when I speak to someone like you, an Israeli who's living with all the problems that Israel faces day to day. You listed a whole series of issues, but you didn't say that at the top of the list was somehow working out a peace agreement with the Palestinians. In America, Yaakov, that's all Jews talk about. How is Israel going to handle and solve the Israeli-Palestinian crisis? Can you give our viewers an understanding?
Absolutely.
Where does that issue rank for Israelis? How important is Netanyahu's stand on peace with Abbas as opposed to housing and education and health care?
Right. I guess that's the difference between seeing things from here than rather from outside.
Yes.
Look, most Israel, again, I'm talking out of public opinion polls and analysis that's been done here on a journalistic level. It's not my own opinion or anything. Most Israelis sort of gave up on this peace process. Most Israelis are frustrated with this peace process. Most Israelis came to some sort of conclusion that for the near future there's no partner, there's no chance, there's no... they just gave up on this, at least for a while. But the burning issues of day-to-day life have become so acute here. I mean, the cost of living is crazy. Mm-hmm. The rents are skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. Buying an apartment is beyond dreaming. Going to the supermarket is, you need a mortgage to buy a basket of a couple of things. It's become crazy. These are the kind of things that definitely control Israeli minds these days. And the campaign is going to be about this. Look, Tzipi Livni, the justice minister who was fired, made her whole issue and political career and last campaign on this issue of peace process with the Palestinians. Latest poll that you mentioned from Channel 2 a couple of hours ago, according to this poll, she lost 50% of her Knesset seats. Mm-hmm. Because nobody cares about it. Mm-hmm. Like it or not, that's the situation.
Yes. Yaakov, you do fabulous work. I was privileged to see some of the work you did during the Gaza conflict, and you are amazingly impressive. And it's wonderful for you to take some moments out right now. It's late in Israel, and you've joined us. I am most appreciative. Unfortunately for you, I'm going to chase you and bring you on whenever I can. I thank you very much for sharing some time with us and your insight. You're wonderful.
Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.
You be well. Yaakov Eilon, who is the news anchor of I-24 News. We're also very pleased to have on our phones right now from Washington, Gil Tamary, who is the Washington Bureau Chief of Channel 10 News in Israel. And Gil, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Mark.
How have you been down there?
Very good. How about yourself?
We're very well, too, and it's good to be with you. So, Gil, I want to begin by asking you again the general question I just addressed to Yaakov. From your perspective, everything you've heard, what in the world was the final straw that broke the coalition government's back? Why did why did Netanyahu decide now to fire Lapid and Livni and force new elections, probably in March?
You know, this process was a boiling process. It started when the Prime Minister wasn't sure that he will decide to go to a new election. But in the last 36 hours, the warming up process became one that arrived to a really boiling point. And at that point, Netanyahu decided that he cannot proceed with Livni and with Lapid within his government. We must say that from observer point, it was more the Prime Minister decision than anybody else decision. He came to the meeting with Lapid last night with an agenda that actually asked Lapid to give away everything that he fought for. That means if you are not going to surround completely to me, we are going to a new election. And that was the result of that meeting. Netanyahu arrived to the conclusion and to the decision that he cannot proceed, he cannot go along with these two partners.
Okay. I want to ask you, Gil, again, this question I've been asking everyone I speak with as we try to get as much information about what happened here as possible and to be able to share it with our viewing audience. I don't understand why Netanyahu, who is not a fool, he's not, whether you like him, you don't like him, this man is not a fool. But it seems to me, from what all the polls I read, from all the information I have, if he runs in a new election in March, he is going to win fewer seats. He's going to have, again, a hard time creating a coalition government that will give him enough power to do whatever he wants to do. What was in his? Why would Netanyahu force this situation? What about it was in his interest?
You see, inside his government, two prime members that are not loyal to him or to his policy. He really doesn't feel he can go along together with them, and this is his impression. And you are telling me that it's not going to be easy after the election. Of course, this is the nature of Israeli politics.
Yes.
It is never going to be easy, but he hopes that in the next election, even though it's obvious that the Likud will have fewer seats than it right now holding, that the entire bloc from the Likud to the right with the ultra-Orthodox and with the Haredic parties, that together they will have more seats, and therefore they will be the one that dictate the tone of the next government, and that he will not have to give up or give many concessions to parties like Lapid. But he's like a gambler. Right now, he went into the casino of Israeli politics, and everything can happen in that casino. We still don't know if Kahlon is going to be the joker or the ace in the coming election. There are so many unknown, and as you know, in Israeli politics, everything can happen in 24 hours. So just try to imagine to yourself what can happen in 3.5 months.
Okay. The casino of Israeli politics. What a wonderful metaphor, Gil. That's fabulous. By the way, in case our audience doesn't know, Gil is referring to Moshe Kahlon, who many believe, Gil, is the next rising star on the Israeli political scene. Talk to our audience for a moment about Kahlon.
Yeah, Kahlon used to be a minister in Netanyahu's previous government. He was the minister for communication, and he made unbelievable reform in the telecommunication sector in Israel that used to be controlled by few very strong players. And right now, if you come to Israel and you make a cell phone call and anything, it's much, it costs less than it costs here in the United States. It's a big reform that influenced each and every Israeli. And he is a guy that in his background is coming from the developing city, from a place that he really built himself to become an authentic leader, and many Israelis sympathize with him and with the things he was able to achieve in his life. And he also demonstrated that he doesn't afraid to confront the big monopoles and the big corporations in Israel, and therefore many people are giving him the credit that he will that he is going to fight for the middle class in Israel.
Interesting. It's interesting also to hear that his strength really has to do with entrepreneurship and what he's done for Israelis in terms of the economic impact of using cell phones. At the same time, Gil, and speak to this for a moment, it looks to us as if parties in Israel, political parties, come and go like lightning. And I remember that at one point, Kadima was the rising star on the Israeli scene. And then we had Yair Lapid, a rising star on the Israeli scene. And many people are telling me that if Yair Lapid was in an election today, he would lose many, many of the seats he has, and that he would not nearly have the kind of power or position that he won only in 2013. Can you speak about...
According to the poll that we broadcast tonight on Israel Channel 10, he's going to lose 10 seats. From 19 seats that he's holding right now, he will hold just 9 seats. And again, we are probably 3.5 months before an Israeli election, so those numbers can change tremendously. But you are right. Since 1977, since the big turn off in the Israeli political map, in each and every election, we saw a party that is, we can call it, in Israel, we call it a party of fashion at the measure of the time. So in 1977, if you remember, it was Dash with Yigael Yadin. Afterwards, there was Shinui with Tommy Lapid, the father of Yair Lapid. Then at one point, we used to have a party of elderly people with Rafi Eitan.
Yes.
Each and every election, there is a fashion party, and Yair Lapid was the party of fashion in the previous election, and many people are gambling that Moshe Kahlon will be the rising star of the coming election. But the real test is, are they going to persevere? Are they going to stay there for the long shot?
Yes.
Because as we see, all those parties of fashion or parties of choice used to evaporate after a few terms and after a few elections.
Okay. I have so few minutes left with you, Gil. I want you to give me as brief an answer as you can. First of all, are you suggesting that the next coalition government is likely to move the Knesset as a whole, the Israeli government as a whole, significantly to the right?
As we see the polls of today, the answer is definitely yes.
And will this, in your mind, reflect the sentiment of the majority of the Israeli people?
You know, this will reflect the majority of the Israeli people, because that's the way the Israeli elections are being held. It's not like the American system with the electoral college. In Israel, if you have more voters, you are getting more seats in the Knesset, and therefore it's really the right proportion of what the Israeli public is thinking in this moment. But we also must remember, I'm talking to you on this specific day,
yes,
on December 2nd, and tomorrow in Israeli politics, it's a new day, and every day in Israeli politics, it's a new day.
Okay.
If the election has been held today, that would be the situation, that the bloc from the Likud to the right will become stronger, but the elections are not today and not tomorrow. Maybe they will be in March.
In 30 seconds, Gil, tell me, why didn't Lapid have staying power? Why was he only a party of fashion for the moment? What did he do wrong?
I think his tremendous mistake was the fact that he was willing to accept on himself to become the finance minister. I think this was a trap that Prime Minister Netanyahu very smartly put on the way of the new politician Yair Lapid. And you heard Netanyahu today. He's saying that he was a very bad finance minister, that is not happy with the results that he brought over. And from the beginning, Netanyahu really put there a political trap for Lapid. Lapid fell into that trap, and last night at the meeting between the two of them, he actually, Netanyahu asked him and requested as an ultimatum from him to give away everything Lapid fought for, which, among other things, is the fact that on your apartment you are not going to have to pay the VAT tax and other initiatives that Lapid has as his flags and the things he would like at most to achieve. And Netanyahu actually asked him, you have to surround now to me with all the main policies that you would like to achieve. Otherwise, you are going to leave the government, and that's actually what happened today.
Okay. I love talking to you, Gil, and I'm going to, again, call you again and again. As you say, the days change, the reality changes, but I hope you'll always be available to JBS for our viewers to gain from your knowledge and insight. Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye, Mark.
Bye-bye. Gil Tamary, Washington Bureau Chief of Channel 10 News, Channel 10 in Israel. A fascinating story. We're going to stay on top of it. My thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director-producer, and to the guy who put this all together today at the last moment, did a fabulous job, producer Ron Jacobson. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.